Anthony and Ed, and the date of the show is the 12th. It's a special edition.
12th of September.
Yeah.
Okay. Sunday special edition. Okay.
Time travel.
Okay. I'm ready when you are. Sorry, guys.
Okay, Dennis.
Hi, welcome to our special edition, Sunday special edition of Unraveling the Secrets. Welcome to our Sunday edition of Unraveling the Secrets. We have our United Kingdom correspondent Anthony Peake, and he's got a special guest, Ed Gilchrist. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right. How you guys doing?
We're great. We're doing fine, thanks, guys.
Yeah. So Anthony, what you got going for us this week?
Right. This week I'm taking a slightly different angle, in that up until recently all the programs I've done is dealing with people who have had direct experiences, whereas now I'm going to be interviewing today a friend of mine by the name of Ed Gilchrist. And Ed has Ed's son is profoundly autistic. He has temporal lobe epilepsy, and he has one or two other fascinating facets to his personality that are clearly related to one or two areas that I discuss in my books. For instance, precognition, and one or two other very, very fascinating things that he can do that really can't be explained by modern science and the way modern science works. I've known Ed now for around about 3 or 4 years, and we met indirectly through my web designer, and we met at a business meeting, and we found that we got on very well because we had a lot of things in common. Ed is also a member of my forum and has been a member of the forum ever since the start of it as well. So what I'd like to do is to give Ed a little bit of an opportunity to tell us a little bit about his son Marty and his illness or his special circumstances. And what we'll do is we'll start discussing in greater detail possibly what may be causing these things that are happening in Ed's life and Ed's son's life. So Ed, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about this.
Sure, thank you, Tony, and hi to Rick and Denis. My son is 26 years old, and he has 2 diagnoses and one set of conditions, which I'll start with, which comes under the name psychosis. We may actually want to put a label on it that says some kind of schizophrenia or paranoid schizophrenia. His 2 diagnoses are autism and epilepsy. The autism has been apparent since birth, as far as we understand, although diagnosis came much later in his life. The epilepsy started much later. The epilepsy started around about 18 years old, so about 7-8 years ago. The psychosis, which is probably has been in recent years the most difficult thing to deal with, began around about 19 years old. So shortly after the onset and the recognition of the epilepsy. And we'll explore that a little bit more. I'll tell you a little bit how he is today, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay.
The situation today is much happier than it has been. It has been really, really awful. And I think you know, Tony.
Yeah, you've been through an awful
known me a long time. But lately, the last few months has seen a great improvement. And that great improvement has not come about because of medication or any other physical changes or any neurological effect, or operations or anything of those things. It's come about, I believe, because of 2 things. The first thing, because we met a psychotherapist actually through your forum some months back, and he has been working with Marty for a number of months now, and gradually won his confidence, and has just the last 2 weeks, has managed to reach inside Mark's inner world. Yeah, so he's inside Mark's inner world, and he's finding characters in there who Marty has been living with for some years, who we all thought were some kind of possession or something. But no, he's found these characters, and Marty has started to open up because of the trust relationship that he's creating with Tony Corley, the psychotherapist. And so now we find that Marty is more at peace. He's more believing that he can control his environment and his inner world particularly. Clearly it's a long journey for him to come back from many years of living with these things, to suddenly realize that he's able to perhaps control it himself. But it is a major step forward for us. There are many other revelations that have happened, but I said there were two things I believe that have changed his life recently. There's that, and that's clearly something that is evidenced by what we see, and specialists will see that too, and they'll recognize that there's some impact of what the psychotherapist is doing. What they might find more difficult is that we've always believed that there were times in Mark's life when he would change the condition that he has through prayer and faith and those things. And so my wife and I continually believe that there's something greater than all of us, and there's something in each of us that can change our destiny, if you like, that can impact where we're going and how things work. And it's this is perhaps for another time, but my own story of an ability I've found that I have to manifest changes around us by simple belief. I think that's had a great deal to do with his change, his improvement, that we've never ever given up the belief that he would one day be as happy as the rest of us. And it's happening.
Which is amazing, because I've met Mark twice, I think, and the one thing that amazes me is that a young man that is very good looking, could be a sportsman quite easily, looks completely normal. In fact, if anything, he could be a male model. He's a very good looking lad, and there's the tragedy that he's kind of locked within himself. And Ed and I have discussed this many times, that it seems as if he's trapped, and that there is something inside him that's desperate to communicate with the outside world and can't, because of the message just seems to get scrambled. Now, many of you may be aware that my overall hypothesis, my cheating the Ferryman hypothesis, suggests that many of us, particularly the people who experience the déjà vu sensations, are actually living our lives again in a three-dimensional recreation of our lives. I also suggest that part of us, what I call the daemon, remembers the future because it's lived the life before. In other words, it's like somebody who's seen the movie. So you've gone to see a movie again, but you have somebody in your head that's already seen the movie, so know what's going to happen next. Now, Ed and I were discussing this earlier on, because we think that there might have been something that happened very early on during the traumatic birth of Marty that could have actually brought about the fact that the daemon manifested itself right at the start of Marty's life, but because it's in the non-dominant hemisphere of the brain, it cannot communicate. So effectively it's this being that seems to know a great deal and can actually communicate with its lower self, but it can't communicate with the outside world. And we have discussed how this could be absolute frustrating for it. Would you like to just expand a little bit on that?
Go back to the birth situation.
Yes, yeah.
When he was born, he was born with an oxygen deficiency, and that's well known to the people who were there. They didn't think there was anything particularly significant about it at the time, except that he was very blue, and that they found his cord was flat and in a knot.
And that meant he was a blue baby then? Was he?
No, he wasn't classed as that. They gave him I don't know what the scoring situation is, but they think they gave him 4 out of 5 or whatever that score was. So he came out with a reasonable score. I think they couldn't give him top because he was blue and because his cord was in a knot. And he screamed and cried the way every other baby does within a moment or two. So it looked to the specialist that he was kind of okay. but it was very soon manifest that he wasn't kind of okay. So within days, we were finding that he was not at all like other babies and other children, and he was very restless. He cried constantly, and at night he wouldn't sleep more than 15 minutes at a time for 2 years. So that was quite desperate, and no one could explain why he didn't respond to the normal psychology of babies. But later we found that he was the only one of our 3 children who was not breastfed, and so we fed him with what was at that time the regular sort of milk and things like that, the powdered stuff. And we found that the powdered things contained some substances that I felt whenever he had it made him worse, and they were additives which were including things like MSG or things called something else that still contained glutamate substances. And at that time I was a bit innocent about the way neurology works, and I didn't read a great deal. I just was trying to deal with sleep most of the time, as you can imagine, and a family that just couldn't get on with this. So he grew up his first year or two, and as we withdrew him from some of these food substances that we thought might be a problem, he became a little better. So he slept better, and he didn't cry and scream and be so frustrated so much. So that's how it all began. By the time he was 3 or 4, there was a recognition that he had an impairment of some kind that was causing him to not do things the way other people do things. Can I give you an example of that?
Yes, yeah.
When he first went to a kindergarten, the other kids were on their little trikes, little bikes, and he would watch them doing this, and he would sit on his, and his wouldn't move, but theirs did. Okay, so why did he not make his work? Well, because what he was seeing was literally kids sitting on bikes. He couldn't see the muscle movement. He couldn't see the connection between the brain and the will, and the legs and the pedals. All he saw was, you get on a bike and it goes.
Of course, yeah, because this is classic autism, isn't it?
And his didn't go. It took us some years to actually get him to understand how that would work. So that's a simple example, and in a way that was a precursor to many, many other things that we learned throughout his life. Yeah.
Because it's intriguing here in that